Hello, upgraders. It's Will here, and on today's show we have Richard Nikoley of freetheanimal.com, which is a massive, long-standing blog with over 4,000 posts, 100,000 comments from readers, and it's something that I've been checking out for years and years and years now. Richard's knowledge of gut biome, and he was the first person to introduce me to resistant starches, which we talk about in the show, was absolutely fascinating. In the show, we talk about how your gut health can affect your brain and also how can it affect your immune system, sleep, and even potentially cause autism. There are a number of products and probiotics that Richard recommends, such as Prescript Assist and Primal Defense, which are both probiotics. And it's just a quick one to note that they are available in the upgradedape.com store. If you go to upgradedape.com and click the store, you'll see all kinds of biohacking products. And it all comes with a guarantee that if you do not see an improvement, we'll give you your money back. So without further ado, let's get on with the show. Hi guys, it's Will here and welcome to the Upgraded Ape Show. Upgrade your brain, get more done, kick life's ass. Hi Richard and welcome to the Upgraded Ape Show.
You're welcome. Thank you, Will. I'm happy to be here.
Great. Well, let's jump straight in. And can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you got involved with the world of paleo in the first place? What's your story, Richard?
Well, the story is one that probably many people can relate to or resonate with. You know, you come to a point. I was in my mid to late 40s and just kind of unhealthy. I was day trading options. And it's just very stressful, and things took a toll. And even though I had years before I had started walking every morning religiously with the dog, so I realized, hey, I've just walked about 6,000 miles in the last 5 years, and I've put on 35 pounds. So, so obviously, the whole insanity clause applies there. So I've realized I had to start doing something different. This was in spring of 2007, and I had been a blogger as a hobby. Since 2003. So, my blog's been around, freetheanimal.com, has been around since for over 10 years now. In fact, it's coming up on 11 years and over 4,000 posts, which averages out to a post per day for 11 years straight. I guess that's what you could call dedication,
For sure, yeah.
But
off the top of my head, I can't think of any blogs that have been going for that long, that consistently.
Yeah. It's not to say that I go days without posting, but sometimes I'll do 2 or 3 in a day. So that's how it averages out. Strangely enough, I was kind of surprised by that myself. So I kind of used that as my kind of outlet and self-checking and bouncing off ideas of people. And I wouldn't say it was a super popular blog at the time. It may be, I used to get like maybe 10,000 visits a month or something like that, which I think a lot of people would die for. But it had been, like I said, been going for a long time. So I just started blogging about it, and I started commenting on there was a few blogs out there, Art Devaney and Mark Sisson and a few other people, so I started, commenting on other people's blogs, and, things just kind of started taking off. So it was kind of a push-pull. So I was motivated, but doing this motivated me more. And I ended up, basically within a year or so, kind of I used to blog mainly about, social philosophy, politics type stuff. From my libertarian anarchist kind of perspective, and so it kind of the whole paleo thing, I think really kind of took the whole thing over. And so at a point, I blog pretty much exclusively about that, general health. Other things too, some supplements and stuff like that, and also the workouts. intermittent fasting, all these things that your listeners have heard about, and may have been involved in or are involved in. But then every once in a while I do one of my old kinds of posts. And now, because I've done so much on it for, well, see, we're talking about 2007, and by 2008 so we're talking now 4 years or so, 4 or 5 years that I've been doing this a lot. And so now, just to keep my own sanity, I throw in blogs about other stuff there as well. So it's kind of a hybrid kind of a deal now. But so that's how I got started in it all, you know.
Well, I've got two questions from that. One, which will lead on to the other one. Do you still day trade?
No. I actually, you know, it's a long story, but it was just plain old too. I just think it's not at least for options, just way too stressful. I mean, it's like you can make tremendous amount of money in a short time. You can also lose a tremendous amount of money in a short time. And what you try to do is to have your winnings outweigh your losses. You know, so if you're a day trader at home, doing 15 to 20% per year is excellent, really, really good on average. But the thing is you're talking about an environment where you are taking huge losses and huge winnings. So it's almost like gambling, right? And it's it took me, once I decided to stop, it took me months to unravel everything, because otherwise you just take you would take tons of losses, right? So I had to stick with it long enough to unravel everything in a reasonable way. And once I quit, I was like, oh man, you know. At first it's very, very exciting. I mean, the analogy to gambling is just so tight. And even though you think, yeah, I'm doing all this studying and, you know, looking at these whether you're doing fundamentals or whether you're doing so-called technicals and everything like that, it's still, I think there's a lot of art to it, and just a gut feeling, or maybe which we might touch on this podcast. You know, who knows? So yeah. I don't know, but no, I don't do it. I already had a company, so with employees and everything. So I basically went back to having a bigger hand in that.
Okay. I mean, the reason I ask is that on the BBC at the moment, I can't remember what the show's called, but there's a show about traders, and it goes from people who are doing it with funds to people who are day trading, and it's really interesting and exciting to see what everyone's doing. Yeah. It's also interesting to see how much money people are losing consistently before they give up on it. What I was going to ask was, what did you do when you left to kind of manage your stress and change things around? Because obviously it sounds like you were stressed whilst you were doing it.
Well, let's see. I think they make a lot of it in your area. I prefer the single malts. That was certainly part of it, is de-stressing by self-medicating.
Well, I guess that's fine until the next morning when you've got to get up and do it again.
Yeah. The kind of not a great place to be in, and plus the health. I had like crazy allergies, heartburn all the time. I was 60 pounds overweight, all these things. And then when you're 40, 46 or so at the time, 47, and you're looking at, getting older, and my blood pressure was like 160 over 110. I'm not sure if that corresponds to the numbers you guys use over there. But,
yeah, it does.
Yeah. And so, but interestingly, before I even got into the paleo thing, I got into weightlifting at the gym, because it was the blood pressure that got everything started. And I said, well, let me look on the internet. I don't want to go on meds. And the most consistent thing I saw was which seemed so counterintuitive, was lifting heavy weights. And I thought of myself, well, if you're going to lift heavy weights, then it's kind of you have this inverse relationship between intensity and endurance. So you probably want to go in and lift heavy weights for a short time, right? As opposed to like the treadmill or something that's, low intensity but heavy endurance.
Sure.
And so I did this, and like I was tracking my blood pressure, and it started coming down immediately, like within 2 days. And within 2 weeks, I was averaging 140 over 90, which is still high, but that's not crazy like 160 over 110.
Yeah.
Right. And that was just from the working out. And I found that when I would measure my blood pressure, the lowest measurements would be about 30 minutes after one of those weightlifting sessions. How counterintuitive is that when you're there going, I'm talking heavy stuff. I mean, I got myself up to doing deadlifts at 325 pounds, the
Nice.
reps.
Yeah, well, it's interesting there that another thing to pick up is that you're actually tracking something so you can see your own progress as well.
Yeah. I know you biohack guys are all into that data kind of measurement stuff.
Well, you've written also, and you touched on it a little bit earlier on, you've written a lot about gut health, resistant starch, and I'd love to dive in a bit more about the gut-brain link. Can you just give us a quick overview of the gut, why it's important, and why it's useful to upgrade it, essentially?
Let's begin with the very fundamentals. And it's not that this stuff has not been known. It's just that now recently, within the last few years, they're making so many connections to all sorts of things from, autism, allergies, autoimmune, psychological issues, sleep, weight loss, satiation, blood glucose control. The list really goes on and on and on with the gut. That it really led a lot of people to start looking at it, and this has led to kind of a popularization in the media, and now we have some memes associated with it, which is a good thing because, to my mind, because it really, I think, serves to provide awareness to the importance. So, for example, the very first meme is that the cells in your gut, I'm talking, microorganisms and bacteria, there's viruses, there's archaea, there's a few other things. These cells outnumber your own human cells by a factor of 10, 100 trillion of them to your 10 trillion. All right, so I'd like to say you're only 10% of who you think you are. So now when you have a scale like that, it ought to just intuitively say, well, gosh, it's got to be pretty important. Now, so that's the first thing. The second thing is that amongst those microorganisms are going to typically be an average of somewhere between 300 to 1,000 different species. These species they can eat the mucus on your gut lining, but they also eat fibers, typically primarily fermentable fibers, not the roughage that was all the rage. Very few people can actually digest cellulose, and there's very few they don't have the bacteria to do it. So we're talking about fermentable type fibers, the things in fruits and vegetables, and like the pectins, the inulin, the onion, the onions, the Jerusalem artichokes, the legumes, the storage organs like tubers. That's where you're going to find the real gut food. Now, some of them don't eat that. What they do eat is the byproducts of the bacteria that eat it. Eat the primary stuff that you feed it. So it's a very, very amazingly complex ecosystem where everybody is literally a snowflake. Because here's why. I told you that it outnumbers, in terms of cells, it outnumbers your own cells by 10 to 1. Well, the genome of your entire gut in terms of the microorganisms outnumbers your genome by a factor of 100 to 1. So you're only 1% in terms of your total genetic being, your own human genes, right? And so when you start to introduce these complexities, you realize, wow, so everybody's a snowflake, and you've got all these, not only do you have all these different species, but they're in different proportions one to another, and they are basically at chemical warfare with one another at all times, right? And they're changing. They can do things like they can change the pH of your gut to control pathogens. They can put out specific, compounds that will either kill or keep other pathogens in check. And this is one reason why it's important. What's most important is not that you have pathogens. Many people carry around E. coli. Many people even carry around C. difficile, which is something that kills. It hospitalizes hundreds of thousands every year and kills, at least in America, about 15,000 a year, right? But many people carry these bacteria, but they're kept in check, in balance by the whole of your ecosystem. Like, think of I used to be a saltwater fish aquarist. I used to have big tanks, reef tanks and everything. And so when you think about, you're taking a little slice of a reef, in the ocean, and it does not have anywhere near you have way more the bioload per, cubic, I'll use your per cubic, meter of water. And so it's a very, very interesting thing. And there's all these chemicals you test in the ammonia cycle, how proteins degrade into ammonia and then to nitrites and then nitrates, and requires anaerobic bacteria and so on. Well, this is very, very similar to what's going on in the gut. And something goes wrong, you can have a tank crash. We call it a tank crash. You come in and everything's dead, And you've probably seen this on nature shows where something happens to a reef and it just becomes a wasteland.
Well, I've got a story of fish, and I'm seeing my parents this weekend, so I'll quickly tell it. I had this goldfish, nothing quite along the lines of what you were doing, Richard. I had this fish, had it for a couple of years. It survived a couple of winters of being brought back from down south in the UK up to northern UK, going back and forth. And very simply, my dad managed to kill it by overusing and you'll listen to this, so this is why I'm telling the story, but I know, because I was heartbroken at the time. It was called Bob the fish.
Bob the fish, yeah.
He was, just to overuse the amount of cleaning agents rather than one drop, he used a crap load of it, thinking that it would do a better job.
Right, yeah. You got to keep things in balance, and you can also overfeed. When you overfeed, you're producing too much waste. I mean, even the stuff that gets eaten itself is going to ultimately be processed and waste, and then what doesn't get eaten is still going to be waste, right? And so all of these things go into it. So that kind of, I think, gives you an overview of the importance of the gut.
Okay, so we've got two questions from that. First one is more open-ended. It's something that I've kind of pondered about in the past, but if we've got so much bacteria and organisms living within us, perhaps you could even say that we're there to support them as opposed to them to support us.
It's like at a point you wonder, you think, you look at the earth and you say, hey, everything here is just here to support microorganisms.
For sure. But then, so obviously they're there, and why are they there from our perspective? What do they do to help us? Why do we need them?
Oh, well, okay. Well, this gets into, first of all, the most obvious thing is they make up 70% of your immune system. So this is why recently they have discovered so many very strong associations, and so in some cases even approaching causality, of the gut gut dysbiosis and various autoimmune conditions. Some of the most obvious ones are things like Crohn's and stuff like that, but rheumatoid arthritis and so on. Allergies. I mean, since I started to work, I've suffered sinus allergies all of my life, and since I have began paying attention to my gut, which is some things we can get into later on if you want some, specific things that I've done, and other people have done on my blog. I don't sneeze, and I have a clear running nose, almost no congestion anymore. And I used to have, be carrying around a handkerchief all the time. So it's been really, really amazing. I don't seem to, one of the reasons I was paleo was because it seemed like, any kind of gluten products like wheat or something like that would really I'd get congested. I would get heartburn and so on. And it seems that that's not an issue for me anymore. Now, I still don't think they're the most healthiest foods around, but it's not like I can't have an English muffin every now and then,
So we touched on the immune system side of it there. What is the link with the brain? And can you just dive into that a little bit further for us?
There's more neurons associated with the gut, and the way it communicates is via the vagus nerve. I'm just giving this in real general terms, but you could speak to a neuroscientist for like really specific stuff. But it really, and I forget the number. I've got a book in draft, and that was a few chapters ago, and I can't remember the number. But it outnumbers the neurons in our spinal cord. So it's extremely important. The problem is it's kind of like figuring, a lot of people focus like on these specific pathogens and whatnot. Well, in some cases you're talking about genus level when there are these different specific species within. And so one might be bad and one might be good. It gets very, very complicated. So that's why I say, I think the general thing to do is to feed it. Here's just to give you one example that might be very interesting from your biohacking and brain performance sort of a thing, and that is one of the reasons that I got into this whole what is now more of a very general interest in the gut biome and everything that's associated. But it started out with kind of this accidental stumbling on in association with a collaborator of mine, Tim Steele. A lot of stuff about him. If you go to my blog and just hit the resistant starch link, I mean, there's over 100 posts on it, going back over a year and a half now. But when we first started doing this, we looked for a way to supplement it, and we came up with potato starch, which is a raw form of just the raw starch granules, extracted potato. This isn't the starch. There's still plenty of starch in the potato, but these are the ones that have not been consumed by the plant yet or heated so that they would burst. They're raw starch granules, so it's called RS2. And so we thought, and it's typically used for like thickening sauces, because as soon as you heat it to over 140 Fahrenheit, the little granules burst. And so they form then rapidly digesting starch. But what these do is they basically pass through your system, and there are certain gut bugs that eat them. So to test, if anyone wants to test that there's a serious brain-gut connection, you take a few tablespoons of this, like dissolved in water or, favorite cold beverage, and down it, a few hours before bedtime and see what happens. You will get some of the most lucid dreaming you may have ever had in your life. It's like, wow, I just lived a whole novel. that night.
Wow.
And so neurotransmitters, all these different chemicals, and there is research out there about how appetites change um, with the ingestion of not just resistant starch, but all sorts of soluble fibers, and there's a lot of different kinds of them. And now our thinking, we started off with this full resistant starch. That's just one piece of the puzzle. Now there's lots of fibers, and I think and another thing where I've kind of strayed from the original paleo message is I think one of the best places to get them is from a variety of legumes, beans. I have certainly had some really good experience with them, and it's interesting. It's interesting that beans have been touted for a long time as a great weight loss tool because they say they curb appetite. So the thought might have always been, well, they're beans or whatever, they're filling, whatever. Well, why? Well, maybe it's the various fibers in them that feed your gut in such a way that connection with the brain works to not keep you obsessed about food and eating your next meal. Plus, it's a carbohydrate source that tends to digest more slowly, so you're not getting like the big spike. And in fact, there's it used to be called the lentil effect. Now it's called the second meal effect, where you will have a much less spike in blood glucose than would be expected with the number of carbohydrates, and it even persists for up to 24 hours. So even if you were to say consume a sugar beverage 4 hours later, you would get less of a spike in your blood glucose than you would normally without having consumed those lentils or beans or legumes in general before them. If you Google second meal effect, you can read up all about it. So have I lost my train of thought here? So put me back on track.
So just so I'm straight with what you're saying, if you ingest a resistant starch, your body doesn't use it, it just passes through your system and your gut, but the bacteria will digest it themselves. Are they then themselves releasing neurotransmitters which then in turn go through the blood-brain barrier and affect your brain and cause the lucid dreaming? Is that the kind of process that we're looking at?
Yeah, probably. And the other thing is that the other big thing is that what the primary feeders of resistant starch do is they release butyric acid, butyrate, which a lot of people, and I don't want to. I mean, probably everybody's heard of bulletproof coffee.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah,
don't worry about that.
Yeah. And so I'm sure I have some every now and then myself, but I do it because I just enjoy the taste of it. I do not think you can. It doesn't matter how much butter you can consume. That butyrate isn't getting to your colon, and where it's really, really needed, because your colonocytes basically feed off of it. So one of the biggest ways to keep a healthy colon is to have lots of butyrate, and the only way to do that is to feed the bacteria that produce it. And resistant starch is absolutely the most intense superfood for those bacteria that create butyrate.
Oh, interesting, because I know Dave Asprey promotes that chemical within butter as an advantage, but you're saying that it's just ruined or digested?
No, it's fine. It's a healthful short-chain fatty acid, but it is being digested by you yourself as a fatty acid. It's not being produced by your colon to feed very specific cells that feed off of it in your colon. They're called colonocytes. And they're one of the primary ways that colon cancer starts is basically the starving of those things down there, particularly in the lower part of the colon. So this is why there's one reason why the supplementing of the resistant starch, like we're talking about in terms of potato starch, is probably not the most ideal way to do it. It's good, it's okay, but ultimately, you want to be mixing it with some cold food that you ingest, and eating plenty of other things, like an apple. Pectin in an apple is a great one to feed your bacteria. Inulin, fructooligosaccharides, and all of these things. If you basically Google around, and what you're looking for are soluble fibers. These are the ones that the gut bugs feed off of. Well, actually, fermentable fibers is what I meant to say.
Fermentable.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I'm definitely going to try the potato starch just to see the lucid dreaming side of it. Take it over some Huperzine A and perhaps some other things, just see what I can get out of it. And I'll report back on that for the listeners.
Okay.
But we've talked about the resistant starches and what we can do to supplement with them. Looking at the bacteria side of it, countless numbers of bacteria. Are there specific ones that we should be supplementing with? Are there ones that will grow and conquer the others themselves if the diet's right? How do you go about rearranging and reconfiguring your gut to the actual bacteria themselves?
Now this is where I wouldn't say at odds. I differ in the way I look at it than a lot of other people. There are people out there, and fine, there are some folks out there that are involved in this that are more clinically oriented. In other words, they're looking to help people with severely compromised guts. People who are chronically constipated, they have IBS, they have Crohn's, or they have some other very serious condition that's clearly linked to their gut health. Okay. Now, in those cases, you might be able to look and say, well, okay, you've got this pathogen, or you have these adverse yeasts, overgrowths, or, there's all different sorts of things. That's not my approach. My approach is to say, let the clinicians, as particularly with clinical experience, deal with those folks in whatever way, learn from it, apply it to other people, and so on. My approach is to be more of a generalist, and I want to say, think of those numbers I just gave you. You're talking about 100 trillion bacteria in up to 1,000 different species, and any number of proportions one to another, right? And so what I do know is this: the way we get our gut seeded is it used to be thought that humans were born with a sterile gut. That's not true. They get their initial seeding via the placenta. And this was proven easily by sequencing the stool of a newborn before he had anything to eat, and without sufficient time for vaginal fluids to get down to his gut and whatnot. So infants get their gut seeded via the placenta, via passage down the vaginal canal, and then subsequently, hopefully, breast milk. And breast milk contains both probiotics, and it contains various prebiotics to feed the bacteria as well. And so, it's a good thing is if you do drink dairy and milk, try to get raw milk, so that the probiotics haven't been killed. So that's one way. Then the way infants further seed their gut is crawling around on their floor, sticking everything in their mouth, eating dirt, on and on and on, right? And then if you think of our hunter-gatherer existence, just the amount of bacteria you would get from soil. Do you think that when they picked a root, and you can, even to this day, you can see them, they will dig up roots and just brush them off and eat them, and especially with roots, because that is where the probiotic bacteria tend to conglomerate, is because that's their food, right? So it can be their food in the soil, and it's their food in the gut as well. So And
just to stop you there, Richard, for a second, there's studies that show all this as well. I've seen a couple of studies of children and their immune systems as adults that show children who were allowed to play outside, for example, and get dirty had better immune systems than adults. And also the difference between natural births and cesarean sections, that also affects gut biome and immune system functioning in the future as well.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, that's a whole big thing too. Is people aren't exercising they think, well, you have to exercise your immune system. Well, it's one you exercise it. You exercise it by ingesting the different things that it uses, but some of those things are actually beneficial. See, this goes back to the big complexity of it, and we cannot. There's just really no way to conduct what I call this kind of unbridled reductionism, or unbridled deconstruction, where you think you can deconstruct every little component. You can't. You know, all the supercomputers, that's too big of a problem for all the supercomputers, especially when you consider that every human is a snowflake. So my approach is to get a little bit more back to nature. Now, I think you should be careful about not washing your fruits and vegetables and stuff if you don't know where they're coming from. But, if you grow them yourself and you know that your soil wasn't a former, chemical plant above it, with heavy metal contamination, then, I think it's perfectly okay to pull out your carrots and your radishes and what other root vegetables you have, brush them off, and chow down. I do it, and I used to grow them when I was a kid. Little did I know that I was doing the right thing, But and here's the other part of this, Will, that we haven't even touched on, is that we become an antibiotic society. I mean, not only are we talking about the antibacterial soaps and shampoos, and by the way, there's a huge flora on your skin and your hair and your nose and your ears, belly button, all of these different things. And, we come from this, and it's understandable when you look back because there were pathogens that wiped out a lot of people. So everybody had this initial idea that the only good bug's a dead bug, right? And so this led to antibiotics have saved, millions and millions of lives. But now we become, people don't really even understand, and they think I actually hear people like the people who love to talk about all their medical problems. It's like a badge of honor that they have, that they have this doctor and da 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 da. And so they talk with great pride about their and that they were able to get I'm on antibiotics, like it's a really, really good thing. Well, the problem is antibiotics are essentially the equivalent of carpet bombing Dresden during World War II. You knock out the bad, but you also knock out the good along with it, right? It becomes kind of a war of attrition on your gut. And the thing is you don't know. In some there are actual cases where antibiotics will help a pathogenic situation. But they also can knock something out of balance if you're going for some other infection that you have in your body, and then all of a sudden, do you know when the for instance, the very most common thing that kicks off a C. difficile infection, which talked about earlier, kills 15,000 in America every year, hospitalizes 350,000. The most common thing that kicks that off is right after a round of antibiotics in the hospital. So what it does is it knocks things out of balance enough for the C. diff to basically spread out of control without being checked by the other bacteria in the gut.
It's interesting, and it seems silly that more people don't understand that when you take an antibiotic, it's not selective, and you are, as you said, just carpet bombing all the bacteria within you.
Yes.
So let's use that as a quick case study, because I know we're coming up to time now, but someone takes an antibiotic, they're giving it to the doctor, from the doctor. What should be the protocol and the process then to repopulate or to rebalance the gut and immune system? Is it, as you said, growing your own vegetables and eating them without scrubbing them clean? Or are there supplements or the specific things that we should or shouldn't be doing?
Now, I've already talked about the fibers. Root vegetables of all sorts sweet potatoes, all the other, the daikon, the radishes, the carrots, all that stuff. Aside from the probiotic aspect, it's just like good gut food. Some fruit, the fibrous fruits like apple is great. I was on a podcast interview the other day. I said, it's interesting. Pectin in the apples is a good gut food. And so maybe it was always the saying an apple a day. Maybe it had nothing to do with the vitamins and minerals in the apple. Maybe people who ate apples regularly were more healthy because of what it did for their guts. And the onions, the garlic, the Jerusalem artichoke, for the inulin type stuff, and there's other ones too. But try to eat that stuff regularly. Actually, and then like I said, the legumes. And so from the gut bug food standpoint, I think following a true Mediterranean template, not the faux Mediterranean in America. I don't know if you have that, but anybody who's actually been to Spain and France and Italy and Crete knows that the Mediterranean diet isn't as it's touted. I mean, they're not eating poached salmon fillets and asparagus every meal. In terms of the legumes and the fruits and the vegetables and the root vegetables, a Mediterranean template is I think a pretty good one. Interestingly, all the blue zones, the people who are the longest lived, they all have legumes in their diet. So I think that's now you've taken care of your gut bug food. So say you've had a round of antibiotics, and who knows if you eat this stuff regularly. Maybe a round of antibiotics doesn't hurt or could even help sometimes, right? Another thing that helps is I recommend that people do is have a good fast every once in a while. Whether it's every week or couple weeks. A good way to kind of get your gut settled down into its primordial state, for lack of a better term, is to starve it for a day or two. I like 30-hour fasts because that's really a 24-hour fast. 6 hours after you ate is when you should be eating. So from there, go 24 hours. Like I said, once every week or two is fine. And I prefer that to the eating window thing. I've done both extensively. And then as far as the supplementation side, try not to be as clean. But the other thing you can do is you can take some supplements, and there is actually, on my website, if you go to freetheanimal.com, there's a little banner up on top, says, do you want to know about resistant starch and gut biome? You click that, it goes to a page, and there's links there. So I do talk about some of the probiotics. There's a few different products that I recommend that are so-called soil-based organisms. So these are more spore formers that you would find in the ground, and these products have been out there for a long time. Dave Asprey recommends them too.
Yeah, you can name them, okay, Richard. So I'm just on there now. Primal Defense, we stock that in the upgraded Ape store as well.
Yeah, the Primal Defense Ultra, the Advanced AOR Probiotic 3, and then my favorite, I think, is the Prescripticist. So those are the three that I primarily use and recommend. And I think the dosages are like 2 capsules a day or something like that, maybe twice a day. I say the way my approach is, because they are expensive, and to make them last longer, what you can do is kind of pound them per the dosage for like the first week, maybe 10 days, then cut it in half. And then after another week or two, what I do now is I take one of them once a day. So basically I'm taking 1 capsule of each every 3 days, and they'll last 3 or 4 times as long. And I think you're still getting once you've established these colonies, I don't think taking more you'll just crap them out. So, when things get overpopulated, what happens? People starve because there isn't enough food, right? So, your gut can shift in a matter of hours. Meal by meal, they have been able to detect pretty important population differences between meals, right? So what you feed the gut, and part of it is, pretty much every crap you take is half of dead bacteria. So.
Well, I'm glad you said all that, actually. So I took a crap load, excuse the pun, but of Primal Defense and Prescript Assist. And then now I take one of each one per day just to balance out the differences between them, I guess.
Yeah.
But I noticed my skin got a whole lot clearer a couple of days after doing that initial batch of throwing them down.
Mm-hmm.
That was a sign to me that there's been a change, something has happened there, which is important to make sure you're not just throwing your money down the drain.
Exactly. And
or down the toilet.
yeah. Well, literally, right? Yeah. And so, and without much benefit, let me quickly, and this goes back to your original question, what's so crazy about this whole gut biome? Realize also, here's one, I'm going to throw out one more of these numbers to go along with all those other numbers. Humans, what's an average human generation is what, about 30 years, I think, is it 20? I can't remember, 20, 30 years. Okay. So the average bacteria go through 6 generations per day, right? They've been evolving for 3 billion years. So, here's another thing where you look like this is so now you have to factor in 6 generations of evolution. We know we've seen bacteria evolve in the lab. We know they evolve because they become resistant to the antibiotics.
Sure.
So then you start factoring this stuff in, and in the equation gets so hard. So let me close that in with what we're talking about here, and that is why my approach is a general one. If you have a really, really bad dysbiosis or something that is solidly linked to the gut, yes, then maybe you need these millions of tests. You need these millions of detoxes and all the different things, but make sure you're doing it with a clinician with experience in this, because then you're deriving the benefit of what they have seen in other patients like you in a kind of a specialist setting. I doubt you're going to find it with too many medical doctors, although that's starting to change too. But there are a lot of naturopaths out there of various sorts that really do specialize in gut bacteria. You ask around. It's becoming more and more wide scope. But I prefer, for everybody else, I prefer you taking a way general approach like we've been talking about. Just for general gut health, just like when you go to the gym, you want to do different exercises, not just one exercise all the time, right?
Great advice, Richard. So I've got one last question for you before we wrap up. Can you just tell us, and take whatever angle you want on this, but what is one thing that you're grateful for today?
One thing I'm grateful for today is that I've been able to have some influence in this, and it's so new and it's so revolutionary. And I've had so many blogs posts about this, and so many people have helped me, not just direct collaborators, but even people in my comments. I mean, there's thousands and thousands of comments. There's thousands of anecdotes. And while there are people with the problems, these are the ones who need to see the clinicians. There are tons and tons of people. I get emails every day from the people who say, wow, it's so amazing. I've been so helped, I mean, it goes up and down the scale. So I suppose that's one thing I'm thankful for, besides myself.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah.
Can you tell the audience where they can find out a little bit more about you, your blog, and your book, and all the work you're doing?
freetheanimal.com, and everything's there. You can use the search function, and you can find out everything there. And there's up in the menu, there's one for the book. I have a a book. It's rather short. It doesn't really cover the gut biome stuff. That's the one that is being worked on now, and it will be far more substantial. I think it's like at 400 pages right now.
Wow.
The one I wrote was more in line of the paleo diet, which covers the diet and workouts, fasting, a lot on nutritional density, which is pretty important. Trying to decide which foods to eat, besides, like my standard mantra is meat, fish, fowl, vegetables, fruits. Maybe some nuts, maybe some dairy, but primarily meat, fish, fowl, vegetables, fruits.
Amazing. We'll link to that, and we'll obviously link to your website and that in the podcast. And just for listeners, it's well worth. There's that much content on there. It's well worth using that search bar to search for specifics, because I've done this a bunch of times now, and the content on there is fantastic.
Thanks.
So, Richard, I just want to say thank you again for coming on the Upgraded Ape Show, and we'd love to have you back when your new book's released. By
the way, I know in the questions you sent me before, there was one that kind of piqued my interest, and let me just throw that out there. You said what book I would recommend, and so I would like to recommend that everybody get a copy of the book Nutrition and Physical Degeneration by Weston Price. Just Google it and search it. I think you can even get it on the web. It's an old book, but it's really amazing. And I think if you read that, you will see the connection to everything we've been talking about right now, because what he found was that people in their indigenous settings, and this was like in the 20s and 30s when he traveled the world, and saw them in their indigenous settings and compared them with people who had left and gone to eat modern foods, you see the stark difference. So that's a book I would recommend.
Interesting. I mean, just on that, I know it won't keep you very much longer, but I know a couple of surgeons. One of the surgeons that I used to do a lot of work with, he talked about this process of local Asian population had zero colon cancer, absolutely zero. The percentages, he's a colorectal surgeon, the percentages were like incredibly small versus the local population that were eating a Western diet.
Yep.
As the Asian population over time began to eat more Western diet, he saw a direct correlation between that and increases in colon cancer, which obviously there's a lot of links between colon cancer and gut biome and everything else that goes along with that. Yep. So there's another interesting anecdote to just put behind the book as well.
It's really amazing because you don't know, well, what is it in the modern food? And it could very well be, you get this stuff in a box and it's got 4 inches of ingredients, right? And I just put a post up like 3 or 4 days ago about all this new research taking artificial sweeteners and even 3 different chemical compositions and feeding them they did it with mice and they did it with humans. And basically it wrecks, it's very ironic because it wrecks their glucose tolerance. So, the very thing people use artificial sweeteners for actually is, and that's that's the exact definition of irony right there, and so you don't know what it is. So the real foods and the real life, get out there and get dirty and don't worry.
For sure. Well, on that note then, that'll be the name of the show, I think. Just go out and get dirty.
Go out and get dirty.
Well, look, thanks again, Richard, for your time, and thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, it's always a pleasure. Thank you.